His sister Bonnie and I were going to beauty school across the street from a restaurant called Art Wren's. And Dawn came in and 3 other people, I think, and they had come to get Bonnie for Christmas holidays. I was living in Houston, and he took me home, and we, visited a few minutes or whatever, and then he left, and I said, "Oh, I sure do like those blue eyes." I didn't tell him that. I didn't see him anymore until June or May or end of May or 1st of June. And I had graduated from cosmetology school and had gotten a job by that time. Got a car. And the first thing I did was take a trip to Yoakum to see Bonnie, because Bonnie was my best friend. Well, Dawn came in from Fort Hood that weekend. And then the next day, we all went for a ride in my new Cougar. He was looking at me in the rearview mirror. And so anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. Of course, I had no idea he was thinking anything about me, really. Later, after that, he came back to his mama's house and Bonnie's house where we were. We started dating after that. It was in June sometime, 1st of June. Then I came back down the next weekend after work. And he came back home from Fort Hood, and that went on several weekends, meaning 3 or 4. By that time, he had decided that we were going to get married. We went back and forth I went back and forth from Houston to Yoakum, and he went back and forth from Fort Hood to Yoakum. And usually he hitchhiked on the way to get in, because he didn't have a car, or he didn't have it up there. One Sunday afternoon, Bobby Brown, his best friend, and the family were all sitting around, and he made the statement to everybody and announced that we were getting married. Well, he hadn't ever really asked me, so we set a date for August the 5th. To get married that coming August. We only had June and July to get ready. And my mother was hysterical. She said she couldn't get ready for a wedding in less than 6 weeks. And we had the wedding at our house with just the family. And we got married, and we took off in our car and went to Austin for a honeymoon. And then some of the other guys that were going to Vietnam with him were there. I remember Tom Bush, and I remember Lop Turner. Anyway, they came in one weekend after we were married. We rented a room that had a kitchen and bathroom and bedroom from an elderly couple there in Yoakum. It was a 2-story or 3-story house. We stayed there. And the guys came down, and they had parties, and I wasn't real happy about all that. But anyway, I figured, well, they're just letting off steam because they're fixing to go to Vietnam, and who knows how many are going to come back. And they were just having a big old time. Being 21 years old, I had looked at the news every day, and I knew it was bad, but when you're young like that, you're invincible. You don't worry that much. But once it started getting closer and closer to the fact, it was scary, and it got even more scarier every day. We just kind of had a regular day, but then he had his cousin and best man in the wedding, Babe Kaiser, to come over. to take him back to Fort Hood. He didn't want me to take him back that night because he didn't think he could handle that. And he didn't think I could either, and I'm sure he was right. But when about 9 o'clock that night, we had been in the living room sitting there talking to everybody and visiting, and it was a very strange situation. Not strange, but strained. I mean, we were like, okay, this is really going to happen. This is it, you know. And everybody was trying to keep control of their emotions. And Don had told me, he says, I don't want you to cry. He says, I just don't think I could handle that. He says, don't cry. He always told me, he says, that he was going to come back. He says, I promise you, I'm going to come back. He said, we'll just say bye, and we'll see you later. And so that's what we did. But he had written a poem to me and folded it up. I had no idea it was a poem at that time, but he folded it up and he stuck it inside my shirt. And he says, you can read this after I leave. So that's what happened. And I read it after he left, and it was a poem about a husband going to war and the wife being left at home. And it was pretty sentimental. In fact, I put it on the back of his obituary whenever he passed away so everybody could read it and to have just that remembrance. But we went out in the yard. It was dark. Baby came and picked him up in his GTO, and he kissed me goodbye, and he left, and I came in and was totally lost it then. And it started raining that night, and I went upstairs. When I went upstairs to go to bed, his parents had their house had a tin roof. Not over all of it, but over this particular section of their house where this bedroom was. And the rain was just coming down on that roof, and it was upstairs. It was kind of a scary house, and dark, and kind of an older house, and it was just scary. Anyway, I was just sobbing and sobbing, and the rain didn't help. And finally I got up and across the hall. I went to wake up Vernon, Don's little brother. And I said, Vernon, are you asleep? And he was over there crying. He said, no, I'm not asleep. I said, would you come over here and sleep with me? And he says, yeah. So he came over and he slept with him. We talked, and finally we went to sleep. I don't know what time it was during the morning, but it was an awful night. He said he'll never forget that night, and I know I'll never forget that night. And the next day it was just like, I don't know, you just feel lost, and you really don't know what to do with yourself. You don't know how to think or what to think. It's just like there's just an emptiness there that can't be explained. Don had left his boots in the bedroom, and he said, I'm going to put my boots here. He said, I want you to keep them right here till I get home. I said, okay. So he left his boots right there inside the door of the apartment we had rented. And so every time I went back to the apartment, I'd see those boots there, and it was just like a ghost being there. It was just, when I found out I was pregnant, it's almost like, how did I get pregnant? Because, you know, everything had been such a whirlwind time in my life, and it was just too hard to imagine somebody that being married and him not there, but yet I'm pregnant. It was just a crazy situation. And then those boots sitting there, I just couldn't hardly handle looking at those boots. I don't know what he was thinking when he left them there. That was one thing that really, really was hard. Yeah, I decided to move back to Baytown because when I found out I was pregnant, and went home and lived with Mother and Daddy, and that's when I worked and lived with them until. He told his mother more than he told me. I don't know why, but I guess that was a mother-son thing. But he didn't tell me. He didn't want me to worry, so he didn't tell me a lot. And I really didn't know a lot until after he got home. And then he was more open because, well, that's when Doris would tell me, his mother would tell me the letters that he had written, and I'd read some of them, and he sent pictures to her, and he wouldn't let me see them. I mean, she never told me because he didn't want me to see them. He didn't really talk about what it was like over there. He just was always telling me he missed me and he loved me, and that couldn't wait to get home. And of course, he'd always ask me about Donnie. Of course, he wasn't born then, but he was asking me about that. There was a lady from church that worked at the post office. Her name was Eileen Bridges. So every time that I got a letter from Dawn, she would call me from the post office against regulations, but she would get the letter and I would go to the post office and pick it up, so I wouldn't have to wait for the mail. And it had been about 2 or 3 weeks that I had not received a letter from him. And then I got one. It was on a Wednesday. I got home from work, and on the outside of the envelope, it looked like it had little spots, what I thought was kind of bloody, and I don't know why I thought that, but I did. And I opened it up. Well, it was a letter telling me that he was on a naval ship, that he had been wounded in the head, and but he was okay, and he was recuperating on that ship. And he said the good thing about it, if there was a good thing, he said, I won't have to go back to the field because I can't wear a hard hat anymore because it was on his forehead, and they couldn't get all the shrapnel out of his head, and so he just couldn't wear a helmet. The whole time, and especially in the afternoon when I get home from work, if the front door would ring, it scared me to death because I just knew the Red Cross or the Army, somebody from the Army was coming to give me bad news, because that's the way they did it then. I don't know exactly how they do it now, but that's the way they did it then. But that never came, and I didn't know that he was wounded, even from the Red Cross, until I got that letter. And after reading it, I got through the letter okay, but then after I finished reading it, I just broke out in bawls and squalls, and Daddy and Mother started running in there and wanted to know what was wrong, and I told them, and I let them read the letter. I don't think I even told them. I think I just had to let them read it. And it was Wednesday night. I didn't go to church that night because I just couldn't get control of myself. And Mother and Daddy went ahead and went to church. They wanted to know if it was okay, and I said, yeah, y'all go on. After that, it was just wanting to have a letter from him to make sure he was okay, just to hear from him that time on. I just was waiting for those letters. That's how I found out that he had been wounded. And I really didn't know how bad it was until later when I saw pictures. And then he told me about, some of the guys that I knew and that had not made it, and then pictures of Jim Brewer and Don Hammond. I didn't really recognize the guys on that ship at the time. They had to tell me who it was later because they were all bandaged up and I just didn't know who they were. And it was hard. Yeah. And he called me from one of the stops that they had made, he told me that he would be in San Francisco the next day, and it would be 2 or 3 days before he got home because they had to get their clearance, and his mom and Elmo and Linda and Jack, Mother and Daddy, and Donnie and me, and I'm not sure, can't remember. But anyway, we all met him at Hobby Airport, and it was so strange because you know how everything is so security-wise these days. You can't hardly walk anywhere in the airport without security. Well, I handed Donnie off to Linda to hold, and I ran down the escalator and ran out on the sidewalk or platform or whatever you want to call it, the side of the landing strip where the airplane had come in, and Don had walked down the stairs, and he had all of his guns with him, which was unheard of. I just know that one was a Vietnamese rifle that he had. He had about 3 different guns, and the stewardess put him someplace on the plane until he landed, and then they gave him back to him so he could come on in. I just ran out there, and they were saying, "You can't go out there, you can't go out there," and I'm like, hey, after a year I can go out there. In my mind I was saying that, and I just kept running and never listened to a person. And we came up the escalator and saw everybody, and everything was just so overwhelming. Everything, if you can imagine, fighting for a year, coming home in 3 days. The 3rd day you're at home with your wife and kids. He didn't know what to think. He didn't know how to act. He didn't know what to do with himself, you know. He had issues when he came home that I didn't recognize. And I don't know if he recognized them either. I mean, he didn't probably know that they were issues. He just thought this was normal, and later we recognized that it wasn't normal, but he had a hard time adjusting to civilian life. All he wanted to do was go back and forth to Yoakum. So we went to Yoakum constantly, back and forth, back and forth. He got a job at J.M. Huber, Carbon Black. Carol Boger got him a job there. He wasn't adjusted there, and come to find out, Carol Boger, who had been in World War II, he hadn't adjusted either. And when the guys would tease them and make some loud noise going off or whatever, well, they would just jump through their clothes just about, you know, and it just would scare them to death. Just was difficult. Even with Carol, it was like that. And Don was really like that. Well, when he first got home, he wanted nothing but bologna sandwiches. He craved bologna sandwiches while he was gone. So I had to make 4 bologna sandwiches for him to eat every day when he went to work. And of course, bologna and I do not get along, but I was like, I can't believe anybody would crave bologna sandwiches. Just bologna and cheese. That's all he wanted on it, bologna and cheese. So that's what he got. Canned biscuits that in the refrigerator that were outdated, and I knew they'd be old and flat, so I just threw them away. Well, in the house there was a door that opened up, and behind the door was a garbage can, and I had thrown them in that garbage can. So one night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, these cans had swelled and busted, and it sounded like guns going off. Oh my goodness. Don he just knew somebody was shooting at the house. And he went around, got his gun and went around the house, and he couldn't find anybody. So he called Daddy for him to come over and look around the house to see if he could find anything or see anybody. So the next morning, I mean, of course, nothing ever happened. Don didn't really go back to sleep at all that night. Not that he ever slept, but anyway, I guess he snoozed a little bit till morning, and I got up to make breakfast. And I opened that door to throw something in the garbage can, and I saw all those cans of biscuits. Well, I just died laughing. It woke him up. He came in and he wanted to know what I was laughing about. I said, well, this is what scared you last night. He said, you see all those biscuits? I said, they exploded. And then we both just howled. It was just so funny. We laughed about that for years. And that was always one of our stories that we had to tell. That he was just scared of, any explosion, any little noise, like big noise, little noise too. And he never would. He always wanted the shades on the windows down at night because he just knew somebody was looking through the window, and he was just real paranoid about everything. He would have nightmares and get up in the middle of the night, and he would be scrambling to get under the vanity stool to the dresser, and he'd be saying, get down, those kind of things. And it would wake me up, and I would see what he was making all the noise about, and I would see him trying to get under that vanity. Of course, the vanity wasn't big enough for him, so it was quite a clatter when he was trying to get under there. He told me several times, like one time when we were in Yoakum, he had taken a nap, and I went in to wake him up to come to eat, and got too close to him when I went to wake him up, and he held up his hand like he was going to shoot me or choke me. And after he realized what he was doing, he said, always let me know at the door that you're coming in. He says, don't walk up on me. He says, I don't know what I'm doing. He says, so those were things that I learned not to do over time, So for a long time, I always hollered at him or called him or banged on the door or whatever before I would enter to let him know, especially in those early days. He kind of got better, but never really got over it. But I guess he never quit having nightmares until later on in life, and later on in the years, probably about 40 years or so after he got home from Vietnam, he finally got to where he didn't have nightmares like that. That was after he had gone back to Vietnam a couple of times and settled things in his mind. He would be so irrational, I guess you could say, and make irrational decisions, and his temper, he couldn't control his temper. He would just do things that you wouldn't expect a normal person to do, and it was just hard to live with somebody when you had to walk on eggshells all the time, because you didn't know from one minute or 1 second to the next how he was going to react to it. Business, and that seemed to help him a whole lot, because it kept his mind off of everything, not everything, but most things. He had to continually think about the business, and he was always really good talking with people, and we did really well. But we went to Jackal Island, Georgia, and it was a Hawaiian luau type thing. When we went out on the beach and we sat down on the sand, and he was watching the waves come in, and it just took him back to Vietnam, and that's when he really got, the PTS really set in bad. And when we got back, he couldn't handle the business because of the PTSD. And PTSD just worked through us his whole life, actually, until later on in life when he went back to Vietnam 2 or 3 times and do some work over there. Anyway, he went back to the graveyard where he had gotten wounded and all of his buddies had gotten killed and that kind of thing. And he said it was all green and lush, and you know, couldn't imagine it ever having a battle there. And the taxi driver that took him there set out on the road and just waited till he had enough, was able to get through the sobbing and the sorrow that he felt after going back, and knowing that the battle wasn't there anymore. And I don't know, then just being there and talking to other people and all, the Vietnamese people who he ended up really loving. He came home, and that really helped him a lot, because the battle was gone, the war was gone, ended, and nothing was the same. And so that really made a difference in him being able to handle the PTSD.